At my son's gala, he raised a glass and thanked his stepmother for keeping the family standing after his father passed away. He never mentioned me the woman who had quietly held the 7 patents, keeping the company alive for years. I left the party without saying a word. 4 days later, my son received a legal notice that left the entire board stunned. And when an unexpected voice echoed through the courtroom, he finally realized he had been thanking the wrong person all along. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from your city? Your country, I want to know. Note some elements of this story are fictional, added for storytelling and educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lesson woven through every word is something I hope stays with you. The night of glass and champagne. The chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the Greenwich Country Club burned the way only old money knows how to burn, steady, unhurried, and completely indifferent to whoever stood beneath them. I arrived at 7:45 alone, the way I had done most things in the last 3 years. The invitation had come through Walter Pemberton, my attorney of 22 years, who had received it through a third party, a polite fiction that allowed Everett to say he had not personally excluded me, while ensuring I was never personally included. I accepted anyway, not out of sentiment, out of strategy. The Caldwell Industries Autumn Gala was Everett's event now. He had stripped away the quiet dignity Edmund always preferred and replaced it with something louder and considerably more expensive: crystal flutes. A DJ whose music pulsed faintly through the marble floors. Waitstaff in white gloves carrying things Edmund would never have ordered. I moved through the room without announcing myself. The crowd numbered perhaps 200 board members, investors, partners from the Manhattan office. Near the bar stood Marshall Keene, 38 years old senior financial correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, holding sparkling water and wearing the practiced expression of a man listening to far more than the conversation directly in front of him. Marshall Keene's presence at a private Caldwell Industries event was not casual. I noted it and moved on. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray and did not drink it. I held it the way you hold a prop because sometimes the most important thing a person can do in a room is appear to belong there while seeing everything. Everett found the microphone at 8:15. My son is 33 years old and carries himself with the confidence of a man who has never been asked to doubt himself in public. He has Edmund's jaw and Edmund's way of commanding a room simply by entering it. He tapped the microphone. The room quieted. He thanked Frank Delano. He thanked Stuart Gibbs. He thanked the team, the board, the investors. He was smooth and generous and exactly as rehearsed as I expected. Then he turned to his left where Portia Davenport stood in a dress the color of deep water, watching him with an expression that had taken her years to perfect. Most of all, Everett said, "I want to thank the woman who has stood beside me through every challenge since my father passed. The woman who reminds me every day what it means to lead with vision." He raised his glass. "Portia, none of this would have happened without you." The applause was immediate. I was standing 12 feet away holding a glass of champagne I had not touched in a dress I had last worn to Edmund Caldwell's funeral. I did not move. I did not alter my expression. I had spent 30 years learning to keep my face perfectly still in rooms that were trying to break me, and this room, beautiful as it was not the most difficult room I had ever survived. I set the champagne glass on the nearest tray. Then I walked through the side corridor past the coat check and stepped out into the October night. Harold was at the curb engine running because Harold always anticipated before I asked. I got into the car and did not look back. I had seen enough. I had confirmed what I needed to confirm. By Monday, Everett Caldwell would begin to understand that recognition is not the same thing as ownership. And in the Caldwell family, ownership had always been a more complicated matter than it appeared. The weight of 30 years. The drive from Greenwich to Litchfield Hills takes just under an hour on a quiet Friday night, and Harold knew better than to turn on the radio. I sat in the back seat and watched Connecticut slide past the window, the dark shapes of old trees, the occasional lit porch of a farmhouse set back from the road, the brief orange glow of a gas station before it disappeared behind us. I had made this drive hundreds of times. I knew every bend. Tonight the road felt different, the way familiar things sometimes feel different after you have seen something you cannot unsee. I had known Everett would not acknowledge me. I had prepared for it. And yet there is a specific kind of pain that preparation does not fully reach, the kind that settles in your chest, not like a wound, but like a stone. Heavy, quiet, permanent. I let myself feel it for exactly the length of the on-ramp to Route 44. Then I put it away. I have had 30 years of practice at that particular discipline. I met Edmund Caldwell in the spring of 1987 at a conference in Hartford, an unremarkable industry event that I attended as a junior patent consultant for a small firm in Bridgeport. Edmund was 30 years old, already running a modest manufacturing operation out of a leased warehouse in Stamford, and he had the kind of focused energy that made a room feel smaller, simply because he was in it. We were married in June of 1990. Everett was born in March of 1991. In the years between those two dates, I did something that most people in our social circle never knew about, and that Edmund understood only partially. I built. Not in the way Edmund built, not through acquisition or negotiation or the slow accumulation of investor relationships. I built in the way a person builds when they know that the structure around them may not hold and they need something that belongs entirely to themselves. Between 1991 and 2003, I developed 7 patents, mechanical process improvements, mostly innovations in thermal regulation systems for commercial manufacturing equipment, unglamorous work, precise technical and extraordinarily difficult to replicate without licensing. Edmund knew about the patents. He encouraged them in the distracted way that busy men encourage things they consider peripheral to the main event. He did not know that I had filed each patent individually under my name alone through a separate legal entity I had established in 1990. With Walter Pemberton's guidance, a quiet single-purpose holding company called Meridian IP Associates, LLC, registered in Connecticut. Edmund never asked to see the paperwork. That was not negligence on his part. It was the particular blind spot of a man who trusted completely and therefore never verified. I loved him for it, and I protected him from the consequences of it, and when our marriage ended in 2004, I retained every patent without dispute because Edmund's attorneys never thought to look for them. The divorce was not acrimonious. Edmund was not a cruel man. He was a distracted one, and by 2003 the distraction had a name and a face and an address in the West Village. I did not fight the dissolution. I negotiated it, which is a different thing entirely. I kept the patents. Edmund kept the company and the Park Avenue apartment and the social standing that he valued more than he ever admitted. We divided Everett's time with the careful arithmetic of 2 people who love a child more than they dislike each other, which made us, I suppose, better co-parents than we had been spouses. I bought the house in Litchfield Hills in 2004 with my own funds through Litchfield Capital, LLC, another entity Walter had helped me establish. I paid cash. The house cost $1.2 million. I had it. Edmund never knew the full picture of what I had accumulated because I had never shown anyone the full picture. That was intentional. The years between 2004 and 2021 were quieter on the surface and considerably more active underneath. Edmund remarried in 2006, Portia Davenport 42 years old at the time of the Gala, but considerably younger when Edmund first brought her to a family dinner and introduced her as a colleague. I said nothing at that dinner. I smiled and I watched and I noted. It was Agnes Whitmore Edmund's private nurse in his final 2 years who first mentioned to me, in the careful way that careful people mention things they cannot prove, that certain documents had been handled in unusual ways during Edmund's illness. Agnes was 55 years old, methodical, and not prone to speculation. When she spoke, I listened. In December of 2021, 3 months before Edmund died, I drove to Greenwich Hospital and I sat in the parking structure on the 4th level for 40 minutes before I decided what I needed to do. What I did that night in December is something Everett does not yet know about. He will. Harold turned off Route 44 onto the county road that leads to my house, and the trees closed in on both sides the way they always do, tall, dark, and entirely indifferent to the concerns of the people moving beneath them. I thought about Monday. Walter Pemberton kept office hours in New Canaan 20 minutes from Greenwich. I had already sent him a message from the Gala, 2 sentences, no details, and he had responded within 4 minutes, which told me he had been expecting it. There were 7 patents. Caldwell Industries had been using 3 of them without a signed licensing agreement since 2022, the year after Edmund died, and the year Everett consolidated operational control. 3 patents, 2 years of unlicensed use, and a son who had just raised a glass to a woman named Portia Davenport in a room full of witnesses. Monday was going to be a very specific kind of morning. The first move. I was awake before 5 o'clock on the morning of October 5th, which was not unusual. Sleep has never come easily to me, and I stopped apologizing for that fact sometime in my mid-40s. I made coffee in the kitchen the old percolator Edmund had given me as a joke gift in 1993, which I had kept not out of sentiment, but because it produced better coffee than anything manufactured in the decades since, and I carried the cup to the study at the back of the house. The study faces east. In October, the light comes in low and pale gold across the ridgeline, and the hills hold the mist until nearly 8 o'clock. I have done some of my clearest thinking in that room in that light, with that particular quality of silence that only exists in the hour before the rest of the world remembers it has obligations. I sat at the desk and opened the file I had been maintaining for 2 years. It was not a dramatic file. It was a green hanging folder inside a locked drawer containing 43 pages of documentation, copies of the 7 original patent filings, correspondence records, a timeline I had constructed from public financial disclosures and manufacturing reports, and 3 pages of notes in my own handwriting detailing the specific operational processes at Caldwell Industries that aligned with patents number 3, 5, and 6. Patent number 3 covered a thermal regulation method for continuous feed manufacturing systems. Patent number 5 covered a pressure cycling improvement for climate-controlled industrial enclosures. Patent number 6 covered an integrated monitoring protocol that combined elements of both. Caldwell Industries had implemented all 3 processes in their Stamford facility beginning in the spring of 2022. Following a capital improvement project that Everett had announced to investors as a proprietary operational upgrade. It was not proprietary, it was mine, and it had never been licensed. Under United States patent law specifically, Title 35 of the United States Code, the unauthorized use of a patented process in commercial manufacturing constitutes patent infringement. The patent holder is entitled to seek damages, including lost licensing fees, a reasonable royalty rate, and in cases of willful infringement, enhanced damages of up to 3 times the calculated amount. I had asked Walter to prepare a preliminary damages estimate 18 months ago. The number, even at a conservative royalty rate, was not small. I finished my coffee. Then I called Walter. Walter Pemberton had practiced intellectual property and estate law in New Canaan for 39 years. He was 68 years old, thin, in the way that certain disciplined men become thin as they age, with white hair kept short and a preference for dark suits that he had maintained since before I met him. He had handled Edmunds Incorporation documents in 1994, had helped me establish Meridian IP Associates in 1990, and had been the only person outside of my own mind who understood the complete architecture of what I had built. He answered on the second ring. "I was expecting your call last night," he said. "I needed to sleep first." "Did you—" "No," I said, "but I needed the hours." He told me to come to the office at 10 o'clock. He had something to show me beyond the patent matter, and he used the word beyond in the careful way that lawyers use words when they want you to understand the weight of what they are not yet saying. I was in New Canaan by 9:45. Walter's office occupied the second floor of a colonial building on Elm Street, the kind of office that communicates competence through understatement rather than display. No artwork that cost more than the furniture. No awards visible from the waiting area. Just good wood, good light, and the particular smell of a space where serious work had been done for a long time. He was standing at the window when I came in, which meant he had been thinking rather than preparing, and Walter only stood at windows when something was turning over in his mind that had not yet resolved. I sat down without being asked. He turned and sat across from me, and he placed 2 folders on the desk between us. One was dark blue. One was the color of old cream. "The patent filing is ready," he said, indicating the cream-colored folder. "Notice of infringement to Caldwell Industries demand for retroactive licensing fees, covering 24 months of documented use and a cease and desist on continued unlicensed operation. We can file Monday and serve by Tuesday." I nodded, and the other folder... Walter's hand rested on the dark blue folder without opening it. Before we discuss the other folder, he said, "I need to ask you something directly. When you made the decision to come to me 2 years ago with the patent documentation, you said you hoped it would never be necessary to use it." "I remember." "Do you still feel that way, I thought about Everett at the microphone. The raised glass, Portia Davenport in deep water blue, 200 people applauding a fiction. "No," I said, "I do not still feel that way." Walter nodded once, as though I had confirmed something he had already prepared for. Then he opened the dark blue folder. What was inside had nothing to do with patents. It had to do with a woman named Patricia Ann Vaughn and with a set of financial records that Walter had obtained through entirely legal means from a source I had not anticipated, covering a period of time that made my hand go still on the armrest of the chair. I looked at the first page for a long moment. Then I looked at Walter. "How long have you had this?" I asked. 3 weeks, he said. "I was waiting to see if you would come to me first." Outside, the October light moved through the elm trees on the street patient and unhurried the way light moves when it has nowhere particular to be. Walter had suggested I take the folder home that evening and return the following morning with my questions. I had not slept. Patricia Ann Vaughn. The documents in the dark blue folder were organized the way Walter organized everything chronologically, precisely with a single yellow tab, marking the page he considered most important. The yellow tab was on page 4. I read pages 1 through 3 first because I do not skip ahead, not even when every instinct in my body is telling me to go directly to the thing that matters. Discipline is the habit of doing the careful thing when the urgent thing is screaming at you, and I had been practicing that discipline since before Everett was born. Pages 1 and 2 were Connecticut Department of Motor Vehicles records. The name on the license, Patricia Ann Vaughn. Date of birth, March 14th, 1982. Address at time of issuance, 114 Carver Street, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Page 3 was a civil court filing from Fairfield County Superior Court dated September 2003. A judgment against one Patricia Ann Vaughn in the amount of $31,000 for breach of a residential lease and fraudulent representation of employment status to a landlord. The plaintiff was a property management company based in Westport. The judgment had never been satisfied. I turned to page 4. It was a marriage certificate. Patricia Ann Vaughn and a man named Gerald Davenport had been married on February 11, 2005, in Clark County, Nevada, which is to say in Las Vegas, which is to say in the particular kind of ceremony that people arrange when they want the legal fact of marriage without the social record of it. Gerald Davenport, according to the accompanying note Walter had clipped to the page, had filed for divorce in Clark County in August of 2005, 6 months after the wedding. The divorce had been finalized in January of 2006. Portia Davenport had taken the name from a marriage that lasted less than a year to a man she had apparently never lived with in a state she had visited for approximately 72 hours. She had been using that name and only that name since February of 2005. Edmund had met her in 2006. I set page 4 down on the desk with the same care I would give a piece of evidence in a courtroom, because that is precisely what it was. She changed her name through marriage, I said. Legally. Legally, Walter confirmed, which means there was no fraud in the name itself. She was entitled to use the Davenport name after the marriage, regardless of the marriage's duration. But she did not disclose her prior identity to Edmund. Not in any document we have found. The prenuptial agreement Edmund signed in 2006, which I did not draft, and which I have significant concerns about, lists her as Portia Davenport, with a Social Security number that traces back to the Patricia Vaughn identity. The agreement makes no reference to prior legal judgments, prior financial history, or prior addresses. I absorbed this. Edmund had married a woman whose legal name was technically valid, but whose entire constructed identity had been assembled for the purpose of leaving her previous life, including a $31,000 unsatisfied judgment, entirely behind. What else? I asked. Walter reached into the folder and produced a separate document, a mortgage instrument issued in 2018 by a private lending group based in Greenwich, secured against the Caldwell estate on Round Hill Road. The principal amount was $12,500,000. I read the document twice. The Caldwell estate had been in Edmund's name alone. Under the terms of their 2006 prenuptial agreement, Portia Patricia had no individual ownership stake in the property. However, Edmund had taken the mortgage in 2018 with Portia listed as a co-borrower, which under Connecticut law created joint and several liability. Both borrowers were individually responsible for the full debt, regardless of property ownership. Edmund had died in May of 2021. The estate had passed per the will filed at probate to Everett Caldwell. But the mortgage liability had not been extinguished by Edmund's death. It had transferred with the property. Caldwell Industries had been servicing the mortgage payments from company operating accounts since July of 2021, which meant that when Caldwell Industries encountered financial difficulty and the quarterly filings I had reviewed suggested that difficulty was not hypothetical, the mortgage payments would stop. And when mortgage payments stop on a $12.5 million instrument held by a private lending group, the lending group does not wait politely. "Who holds the mortgage?" I asked. Walter allowed himself a small pause, which from him was the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. "Litchfield Capital, LLC," he said. I did not respond immediately. I sat with that information for a moment. The particular sensation of a thing you have constructed years ago, for a purpose you understood only in the abstract, suddenly becoming exactly the instrument you needed it to be. Litchfield Capital, LLC had been established in 2004. It held the deed to my house in the hills and several other investment properties I had acquired over the years through careful private transactions. It had also, in 2018, extended a private mortgage on the Caldwell estate, a transaction handled at arm's length through intermediaries, because I had anticipated that Edmund might eventually need liquidity, and that private lending was cleaner than institutional. I was the sole shareholder of Litchfield Capital, LLC. Edmund had borrowed $12.5 million from me without knowing it was me. And now Everett was living in that house, servicing that debt from a company that was beginning to struggle, and the lender, his mother, had every legal right under Connecticut mortgage law to initiate foreclosure proceedings upon default. I had not planned this specific convergence, but I had built the pieces carefully enough that when they converged, I was ready. "File the patent notice Monday," I said. "Hold the mortgage." "For how long?" I picked up the dark blue folder and straightened the pages before closing it. "Until he understands what he is holding," I said, "and what he is about to lose." Walter nodded and made a note. Outside the window, the elms on Elm Street had begun to show their October color yellow at the edges, still green at the center, in that brief suspended state, before the cold makes the final decision for them. I thought about the Caldwell estate. 8 bedrooms, 4 acres, the kitchen where Everett had learned to read sitting at the long oak table while Edmund worked at the counter nearby. The house was beautiful, and it was in every way that mattered already mine. The estate at dawn. I drove past the Caldwell estate on the morning of October 10th without stopping. Round Hill Road was quiet at that hour, just the fieldstone wall Edmund had restored in 2011. The iron gate closed the oak trees in full October color that residents of houses like that one walked past without registering. The lights in the east wing were on. Portia was an early riser. I had known that since Agnes mentioned it almost in passing while describing the household rhythm during Edmund's final months. I drove on without slowing. Some things are better seen briefly, long enough to remember what you are dealing with, not long enough to feel anything you cannot afford to feel. The patent infringement notice had been served 2 days earlier on October 8th at 9:14 in the morning. Walter's process server, a retired Stamford police officer named Jean Hollis, who had delivered legal documents for 20 years with the economy of motion that comes from doing a thing thousands of times, had handed the envelope to the receptionist at Caldwell Industries' Manhattan office, obtained a signature, and texted Walter the confirmation within the hour. The notice demanded immediate cessation of unlicensed use of patents, 3, 5, and 6 registered to Meridian IP Associates, LLC, and retroactive licensing fees, covering 24 months of documented commercial application. Walter's calculation using a conservative royalty rate placed the liability at approximately $2.3 million. $2.3 million would not by itself destroy a company the size of Caldwell Industries. But it would do something more precise than destruction. It would tell every board member, every investor, every person whose name appeared on a prospectus that the operational processes they believed were proprietary were not that the ground beneath the structure had shifted while everyone inside was looking at the ceiling. I had counted on exactly that. Everett called at 11:47. I know the time because I was standing in my kitchen looking at the railway clock above the stove when his name appeared on my phone. He had not called me in 4 months. I let it ring 3 times. Everett, what is this? Not a question. His voice had the flat quality of a man controlling anger with considerable effort and not entirely succeeding. You'll need to be more specific, I said. The patent notice. Meridian IP Associates, Walter Pemberton's office. That would be the infringement notice, I said. 2 years of unlicensed use of 3 patented processes constitutes infringement under federal patent law. Walter can walk your legal team through the specifics. A silence. I could hear him breathing. I want to meet, he said, in person, this week. I'll have Walter's office send you available times. This isn't a scheduling matter. Everett. I kept my voice level, not cold, simply level the way a surface needs to be level before anything can be built on it. Everything is a scheduling matter until it isn't. I'll have Walter reach out this afternoon. I ended the call. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the hills holding their morning mist, unhurried, indifferent, entirely uninterested in the concerns of people in buildings 20 miles away who had just discovered that what they thought they owned, they did not own. Everett had called me. That was new. Not out of care, not yet. Out of alarm. Alarm was a beginning. What I had not told him, what he had no way of knowing, was that earlier that week, Dennis Pryor, the company's director of operations, had sent Walter a quiet and careful communication. Dennis was 51 years old. He had worked for Caldwell Industries since Edmund's time. He was, in my estimation, the most honest person in that building. What he had sent Walter was going to complicate everything considerably. For Portia, most of all. The ghost in the numbers. The report arrived at 4:17 in the afternoon, forwarded from Walter's office to a secure document portal that Walter had insisted on establishing 2 years ago, when I first brought him the patent files. At the time, I had considered the portal unnecessary. Walter had gently pointed out that the kind of information we were dealing with deserved the kind of container that could not be accidentally forwarded, photographed over a shoulder, or subpoenaed without a court order. I had agreed, and I had been grateful for that particular caution ever since. I opened the report at the long table in my study, with the hills outside the window going dark in the early autumn evening, and a cup of tea I had made, and largely forgotten, sitting at my elbow. Declan Frost was in the adjoining room, the small office I had converted from a guest bedroom in 2019, when his role in my life had shifted from occasional to essential. And I could hear the quiet sound of his keyboard, which told me he was already working on something related. Declan was 45 years old. He had come into my life in 2019 when I arranged for him to assist Edmund during the final years of Edmund's illness, an arrangement made through channels that kept the full details private because I had not yet decided what our relationship should look like, and I did not want to make a decision I could not take back. I had over time come to understand that Declan was considerably more capable than the role suggested, and when I needed someone I could trust with the full scope of what I was building, I had asked him directly whether he was interested in a different kind of work. He had said yes without hesitation, which told me everything I needed to know about his judgment. I would explain the rest of Declan's story when the time came for it. For now, what mattered was that he was in the next room and that the report on my screen had been compiled in part from information he had helped Walter obtain. Dennis Pryor had worked for Caldwell Industries for 19 years. He had started under Edmund as a floor supervisor at the Stamford facility and had risen through a combination of competence and the particular loyalty that certain people extend to institutions they believe in to director of operations. He was not a man who made accusations lightly. He was, by every account I had assembled, the kind of person who sits on uncomfortable information for 6 weeks precisely because he wants to be certain before he speaks. What he had sent Walter was a summary of 17 internal wire transfers executed between March and September of 2024 from a Caldwell Industries discretionary operating account to a series of vendor entities that Dennis had been unable to verify through normal procurement channels. The transfers totaled $463,000. Dennis had spent 6 weeks cross-referencing the vendor names against state business registrations, federal tax identification records, and the company's own approved vendor database. None of the recipient entities appeared in the vendor database. 2 of them appeared in state business registrations, both registered in Delaware, both listing the same registered agent, both formed within 90 days of the first transfer. Delaware is a common state of incorporation for legitimate businesses. It is also, for reasons relating to its minimal disclosure requirements and flexible corporate statutes, a preferred jurisdiction for entities whose primary purpose is the movement of money rather than the conduct of business. This is not illegal by itself. It becomes problematic when the entities receiving funds from a company have no verifiable business relationship with that company, no deliverables on record, and no employees listed in any public filing. Dennis had noted one additional detail at the bottom of his summary set, apart from the rest of the text, as though he had added it. After some deliberation, the discretionary operating account from which the transfers had been made required 2 authorizing signatures for transactions above $25,000. The authorizing signatures on all 17 transfers were Portia Davenport and Morris Holt, the company's chief administrative officer. Morris Holt was 62 years old and had joined Caldwell Industries in 2022, the year after Edmund's death, recruited personally by Portia. I read Dennis's summary twice. Then I called Declan into the study. He came in quietly and sat in the chair across the table without being asked. He had learned my habits well enough to know that when I called him in during an evening work session, I needed a second mind, not ceremony. "You've seen the Pryor report," I said. "Walter sent me the summary an hour ago," he said. "I've been running the Delaware registrations." And Declan opened his laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a corporate filing document, a Delaware LLC formation record, dated January 2024. The registered agent was a firm in Wilmington. The sole member listed was a trust. The trust's name was the DPV Family Trust. I looked at Declan. DPV, I said. Davenport, Patricia, Vaughn. He said it quietly without emphasis, the way you say something that does not need emphasis, because the weight is already entirely in the letters. The $463,000 had not gone to vendors. It had gone to shell entities controlled through a trust bearing her 3 initials by Portia Davenport. This was not a licensing dispute. This was not a civil matter between parties with competing claims. What Dennis Pryor had documented and what Declan had now confirmed through public records was corporate theft. Money taken from a company by a person in a position of trust, concealed through intermediary entities, executed over 7 months with the co-signature of a hand-picked administrative officer. Under Connecticut law, this constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Under federal law, the use of wire transfers to move misappropriated funds constituted wire fraud, a criminal offense carrying penalties of up to 20 years per count. 17 transfers. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the old plaster ceiling of a house I had bought with my own money in my own name 20 years ago for exactly this kind of evening. "There's something else," Declan said. His voice had the particular quality it took on when he was about to tell me something he had been uncertain whether to say, not reluctance exactly, but the careful pause of a person who respects the weight of information. "Tell me," I said. He reached into the folder he had carried in from the adjacent office and placed a single sheet of paper on the table between us. It was a photograph, a still image slightly grainy, the kind produced by a hospital security camera. The timestamp in the lower right corner read December 14th, 2021. The location stamp read Greenwich Hospital Level 4, Corridor B. In the photograph, 2 people were standing outside a door marked Room 412. One of them was Portia Davenport. The other was a man I did not immediately recognize, heavy-set in a dark jacket, carrying a leather briefcase. "Who is the man?" I asked. "His name is Raymond Solt," Declan said. "He is a notary public licensed in Connecticut. His license was suspended in 2023 for irregularities in document authentication. Room 412 at Greenwich Hospital. Edmund had been in room 412 in December of 2021. I did not speak for a long moment. The tea at my elbow had gone completely cold. "Get Walter on the phone," I said, "tonight. Before I reveal what Vivienne recorded inside that hospital room 3 years ago, comment the word room below, so I know you're still with me. What she captured that night will change everything you thought you understood about this family." A reminder, the story ahead contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Some details may not reflect events exactly as they occurred. If that's not for you, it's completely okay to step away now. Room 412. Walter arrived at my house at 9 o'clock that evening. He did not call ahead beyond a single text, "leaving now," which told me he had understood the photograph the moment Declan described it to him on the phone, and that he had been waiting for this particular piece to surface for longer than he had admitted during our meeting on Elm Street. I had made fresh coffee. Declan had cleared the long table in the study and laid out 3 items: the Dennis Pryor report, the Delaware LLC filing, with the DPV family trust notation, and the hospital photograph in a clear document sleeve. Walter sat down, put on his reading glasses, and looked at the photograph for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Raymond Solt." "You know him," I said. "I know of him. He operated a notary and document services business in Coscob for about 15 years. His license suspension in 2023 came after a complaint filed by a probate court in Bridgeport irregularities in the authentication of estate documents. The investigation is ongoing as far as I know." Walter set the photograph down carefully. The timestamp is December 14th, 2021. "Yes. Edmund died May 12th, 2022. Walter looked at me over his glasses. The will submitted to probate was dated December 19th, 2021. 5 days after the photograph. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the hills were entirely dark now, the tree line invisible against the sky, and I could see my own reflection in the glass, a woman of 60 in a room full of documents, standing at the edge of something she had been approaching for 3 years. "I need to tell you what I know about that night," I said. "And I need to tell you how I know it." Agnes Whitmore had called me on December 15th, 2021, the morning after the photograph was taken. Agnes was Edmund's private nurse during the final phase of his illness. She was methodical, quiet, and possessed of the particular ethical clarity that certain people in caregiving professions develop after years of watching families behave badly around sick and vulnerable people. She had seen things. She was careful about what she said and to whom. She called me at 7 in the morning. She said she needed to speak with me in person, not on the phone. I drove to Greenwich that afternoon and met her at a coffee shop on Greenwich Avenue away from the hospital. What Agnes told me in the careful and precise language of a woman who understood she was describing something serious, the previous evening, December 14th, she'd been completing her shift notes in the nurses' station on level 4 when she saw Portia Davenport arrive at the unit with 2 men she did not recognize. One carried a briefcase. Edmund had been having a difficult week. His cognition was fluctuating, the medication adjustments had been difficult, and he had had 2 episodes of significant confusion in the preceding 4 days. Agnes had observed from the corridor Portia and the 2 men enter room 412. She had noted the time 8:47 in the evening. She had noted that the door was closed, which was unusual. She had also noted that Edmund's attending physician had not been present and had not been notified of the visit, which was contrary to the care protocol Agnes had been following. The men left the room at 9:22. Agnes had used her phone to photograph the corridor as they passed the nurse's station, because Agnes was the kind of person who documented things she was uncertain about. Her photograph showed the corridor from behind the back of 2 men, one carrying a briefcase, moving toward the elevator. I had asked Agnes to send me the photograph. She had hesitated. Then she had sent it. I had held that photograph on my phone for 3 years, waiting to know what I was actually looking at. What I had not told Agnes, and what I had not told Walter until this evening, was that I had done something else in December of 2021. Something I had decided upon in the 40 minutes I spent in the parking structure at Greenwich Hospital before I drove home after Agnes's call. I had gone back to the hospital. Not that night. 3 days later, on December 17th, I had gone to see Edmund during visiting hours, which I was still permitted to do, because Edmund had never formally restricted my access and Portia had never thought to arrange it. Edmund was having a clearer day. His eyes were focused. He recognized me immediately, and he was tired but present in the way that he sometimes managed, even in those final months. I had sat with him for an hour. We had talked about small things, the weather, a book he had been trying to read, a memory of Everett at 7 years old that had surfaced for him that morning. And then, near the end of the visit, I had told him that I wanted to show him something on my phone. I had shown him a patent document, a licensing term sheet, a letter, and I had recorded the conversation. Not covertly, I had placed my phone on the table between us screen, visible the recording application running, and I had told Edmund I was making a record of what he said, because I wanted to be certain I understood his wishes correctly. Edmund had nodded. He was a man who had spent 40 years in business. He understood documentation. What Edmund said in that recording was not about patents. It had begun about patents, and then it had gone somewhere else, somewhere I had not anticipated. And by the time I left room 412 on December 17th, 2021, I had in my possession something that I had not gone to the hospital intending to obtain. I had Edmund's voice recorded clearly describing what had happened on the evening of December 14th. He had been confused, he said. He had not fully understood what he was signing. A woman, his wife, had guided his hand at one point. He had thought it was a medical document. He had asked for his glasses and been told he did not need them. I turned away from the window and looked at Walter. "I have the recording," I said. "I have had it for 3 years." Walter was very still. "Edmund's voice," I said. December 17th, 2021, describing what happened in that room 2 nights earlier. His cognition was clear that day. He knew what he was telling me. Walter removed his glasses and set them on the table. "Vivienne," he said quietly. "That recording combined with the photograph and Agnes's account is sufficient to file a will contest in probate court. Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, potentially fraud upon the court given that the will was submitted to probate without disclosure of his cognitive state." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you bring this to me 3 years ago?" I looked at the photograph of the corridor outside room 412, the 2 men walking away, the briefcase, the timestamp. Because 3 years ago, I said Everett believed his father died at peace with his affairs in order cared for by a woman who loved him. and I was not certain that taking that from him before he had done anything to earn the truth was the right thing to do. Walter had told me in December of 2021 that the recording and Agnes's account together constituted reasonable suspicion, but not yet actionable proof that without the hospital footage, which we did not yet have any challenge to the will, would likely fail and would alert Portia before we were ready. Waiting was not concealment, it was preparation. Walter was quiet for a moment. "And now," he said, "I thought about the champagne glass, the ballroom, the raised toast to Portia Davenport. Now, I said he has done something to earn it. The morning of reckoning. The Superior Court of Connecticut in Stamford sits on Washington Boulevard, a building of pale stone and institutional gravity that communicates without apology that whatever brought you here is serious and will be treated accordingly. I arrived at 8:40 in the morning, 20 minutes before Walter had asked me to be there. The October air was sharp and carried the particular clarity that comes after several days of rain, and the maples along the boulevard had dropped enough leaves that the sidewalk was a continuous pattern of red and yellow that no one walking into a courthouse pauses to appreciate. I appreciated it. I had learned long ago to take in small, beautiful things on mornings when large, difficult things were about to happen. Walter was waiting in the lobby with his briefcase and the expression he wore when he was prepared, which was different from his usual expression only in a certain quality of stillness, as though he had already moved through every contingency in his mind and settled on the ground. "Everett's attorney is already upstairs," he said quietly. "Gerald Stanton from the firm on Post Road. Competent. He'll push back on the recording." "Let him," I said. "Agnes is in the witness room. She arrived at 8:15. She brought her original shift notes from December 14th. I had not known Agnes still had those notes. The fact that she did that, she had preserved them for 3 years in a folder she had apparently kept at home, rather than submitted to the hospital's record system, told me something about Agnes Whitmore that I had suspected, but never confirmed she had known from the night of December 14th that she might eventually need them. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The proceedings were before Judge Carol Whitfield, 61 years old, 23 years on the bench, with a reputation for impatience toward procedural maneuvering and a corresponding patience for factual substance. Walter had considered her assignment fortunate. I had looked her up independently and agreed. The matter before the court was a contested probate proceeding, Vivienne Caldwell through her attorney Walter Pemberton, challenging the validity of the last will and testament of Edmund Reginald Caldwell, dated December 19, 2021, and submitted to Fairfield County Probate Court in June of 2022. The ground's lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence at the time of execution. Gerald Stanton, representing Everett Caldwell as the named beneficiary under the contested, will sat across the aisle with 2 associates and a demeanor of controlled skepticism. He was in his mid-50s, silver at the temples, with the particular bearing of an attorney who has spent decades in rooms like this one and considers surprise a form of incompetence. Everett sat beside him. This was the first time I had been in the same room as my son since the Gala 19 days earlier. He was wearing a dark suit I did not recognize new, expensive, the kind of suit a man buys when he wants a room to take him seriously. He did not look at me when I entered. He looked at the table in front of him with the focused blankness of a person managing something internally that they cannot show externally. I sat down and opened my folder. Walter's opening statement was precise and brief. 12 minutes, no rhetorical flourish, simply a clear sequential account of the grounds for contest. Edmund's documented cognitive decline in late 2021. The presence of unauthorized visitors in his hospital room on the evening of December 14th. The identity of Raymond Solt and the subsequent suspension of his notarial license and the existence of a prior valid will dated March 2019 that had never been revoked by Edmund through any documented act of sound mind. Gerald Stanton's response was what I had expected the 2021 will had been properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. Edmund Caldwell had a history of updating his estate documents and had every right to do so. The challenge was an attempt by a divorced former spouse to relitigate settled matters for financial gain. He said the words divorced former spouse with a particular emphasis that was intended to communicate something about standing and motivation. I noted it without reacting. Judge Whitfield allowed both statements, asked 3 clarifying questions of Walter, and then called Agnes Whitmore. Agnes testified for 47 minutes. She was composed in the way that certain people are composed when they are telling the truth about something difficult, not performing calmness, but genuinely settled, because the account they are giving is simply what happened, and the facts do not require management. She described the evening of December 14th in the same sequence she had described it to me in the coffee shop on Greenwich Avenue 3 years earlier, the arrival of Portia Davenport with 2 men, the closed door, the departure at 9:22, the photograph she had taken in the corridor. She described Edmund's condition during that week, the medication adjustments, the 2 episodes of significant confusion on December 11th and 13th, her clinical assessment that his cognitive capacity on the evening of December 14th was in her professional judgment as a licensed registered nurse with 26 years of experience significantly impaired. Gerald Stanton cross-examined vigorously. He challenged Agnes's qualifications to assess cognitive capacity, her proximity to the room during the visit, and the admissibility of the corridor photograph as evidence of anything beyond the presence of visitors. Agnes answered each question with the same unhurried precision. She did not elaborate beyond what was asked. She did not retreat from anything she had said. When she stepped down the shift notes, she had preserved 12 pages of clinical observations from Edmund's final weeks dated and initialed in her careful hand were entered into evidence as Exhibit 3. Walter then moved to introduce the audio recording. Stanton objected immediately on grounds of relevance, authenticity, and potential violation of Connecticut's recording consent statute, which requires under Connecticut General Statutes, Section 52-570B, that all parties to a private conversation consent to its recording. Walter had anticipated this. He responded that the recording had been made with Edmund's full knowledge and visible consent. The phone had been placed openly on the table. The recording application had been visible on the screen, and Edmund had been informed that a record was being made. He submitted my written account of the circumstances signed and notarized as supporting documentation. Judge Whitfield reviewed the objection for 4 minutes. Then she ruled the recording admissible subject to authentication and scheduled a separate session for the following morning to hear the audio in its entirety and to receive Walter's additional evidence, which Walter had described to the court as video documentation relevant to the circumstances of the December 14th visit. Gerald Stanton looked for the first time as though something had arrived that he had not prepared for. Everett looked at me then, the first time since I had entered the room. His expression was not anger. It was something more complicated than anger. It was the expression of a person beginning to understand that the story they have been living inside is not the story that actually happened. I held his gaze for a moment, then I looked back at my folder. Tomorrow the court would hear Edmund's voice, and then it would see something else entirely. Frame by frame. The second session began at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the courtroom felt different from the day before in the way that rooms feel different when everyone in them knows that something conclusive is about to happen. The gallery had 3 additional observers. 2 I did not recognize. One I did Marshall Keene of the Wall Street Journal sitting in the back row with a legal pad and a pen, and the careful stillness of a man who has learned that the most important thing a reporter can do in a courtroom is not move. I had half expected him. His presence at the Gala 20 days earlier had not been coincidental, and a reporter who attends a Caldwell Industries event does not stop following the story simply because the event ends. I noted him and looked away. Walter and I took our seats. Gerald Stanton arrived 2 minutes later alone. This time his associates from the previous day were absent, which I interpreted as either a logistical decision or a signal that Stanton had reassessed the complexity of what he was walking into. Everett arrived last at 8:59 and sat without looking at anyone. He had not slept. I could see it in the particular quality of stillness that exhaustion produces, not the stillness of composure, but the stillness of a person who has run out of the energy required to perform composure. Judge Whitfield entered at 9 o'clock exactly. Walter played the audio recording first. Edmund's voice came through the courtroom speakers with a clarity that I had not fully prepared myself for, even though I had listened to the recording dozens of times over 3 years. There is a difference between a voice in your memory and a voice in a room, a physical difference, a presence that memory cannot replicate. Edmund sounded tired. He sounded like a man in his late 60s who had been ill for a long time and was having a day that was better than the days surrounding it. But he was clear. The clarity was unmistakable, the precision of his word choices, the logical sequence of his account, the absence of the confusion that Agnes had documented in her shift notes. He described the evening of December 14th in his own words, unprompted. He said a woman had come with 2 men he did not know. He said he had been asked to sign something and had not been given time to read it. He said someone had guided his hand. He said he had asked for his glasses and been told that it was not necessary. He said he had thought at the time that it was a medical consent form. He said, "I didn't understand what I was signing, Vivienne. I want you to know that." The courtroom was very quiet. Everett had his hands flat on the table in front of him, and he was looking at them with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was approximately 11 years old and had broken something valuable and was trying to determine whether the damage was repairable. Gerald Stanton did not cross-examine the recording. There was nothing to cross-examine. The voice was authenticated. The circumstances of the recording had been established. The content was what it was. Judge Whitfield made a note and asked Walter to proceed to the video evidence. The video had been obtained through a formal legal request, a subpoena to Greenwich Hospital for security camera footage from Level 4 Corridor B for the period between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the evening on December 14, 2021. Hospitals retain security footage for varying periods. Greenwich Hospital's retention policy at the time of the recording was 36 months for corridor footage not associated with an incident report. Declan had identified this retention window 8 months ago and had flagged it to Walter, who had filed the subpoena, with 11 weeks to spare before the footage would have been automatically deleted. That 11-week margin had not been accidental. Declan had calculated it precisely. The footage played on a monitor set up by the court's technical staff. It was in color, reasonably high resolution, and covered the full corridor outside room 412 from a camera mounted near the nurse's station. The court watched 8 minutes of footage in total, divided into 3 segments Walter had identified as most relevant. The first segment showed Portia Davenport arriving at the corridor at 8:44 in the evening, accompanied by 2 men. One of the men, heavy-set dark jacket leather briefcase, was identified by Walter through a DMV photograph submitted as Exhibit 7, Raymond Solt Notary Public License subsequently suspended by the Connecticut Department of Administrative Services in February of 2023. The second segment at 9:08 showed the group inside the room. The camera angle did not cover the room interior, but it showed the corridor clearly, and it showed something that Agnes had not mentioned in her testimony, because she had not seen it from the nurse's station, a second man previously not visible, standing in the doorway of room 412 for approximately 40 seconds before stepping back inside. Walter froze the frame. The man in the doorway was Morris Holt. The same Morris Holt who had co-signed 17 wire transfers from Caldwell Industries to shell entities controlled by the DPV Family Trust. There was an audible shift in the room, not a sound exactly, but the collective adjustment of several people recalibrating what they understood. The third segment showed the group leaving at 9:21. Raymond Soul's briefcase visibly fuller than when he had arrived. Walter submitted the full subpoenaed footage as Exhibit 8, along with a certified copy of Raymond Solt's license suspension record, and a sworn declaration from a forensic document examiner retained by Meridian IP Associates stating that the signatures on the December 2021 will, when compared to authenticated samples of Edmund Caldwell's signature from 2019 and 2020, showed measurable inconsistencies in pressure angle and baseline alignment consistent with a signature produced under physical guidance or significant motor impairment. Gerald Stanton requested a recess. Judge Whitfield denied it. She reviewed the submitted evidence for 14 minutes, during which the courtroom was as quiet as I have ever heard a room full of people be. Then she ruled. The last will and testament of Edmund Reginald Caldwell, dated December 19, 2021, was voided on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. The prior valid will dated March 14, 2019 was reinstated as the governing instrument of Edmund Caldwell's estate. Under the 2019 will, which Walter had held in secure storage since Edmund had signed it in his office on a Tuesday afternoon 5 years ago with 2 disinterested witnesses and his full faculties, Everett Caldwell was named the primary beneficiary of the Caldwell family estate and all associated assets. The inheritance, however, was conditioned on Everett fulfilling 3 specific obligations within 18 months of Edmund's death: maintaining the estate's charitable giving commitments at their historic level, submitting to an independent audit of Caldwell Industries' financial operations, and meeting personally with Edmund's estate attorney, Walter Pemberton, to review a sealed letter Edmund had left in Walter's custody. Everett had fulfilled none of the 3 conditions. The 18-month window had closed in November of 2023. Under the terms of the 2019 will's contingency clause, failure to meet the conditions within the specified period resulted in the estate reverting to a trust administered by Walter Pemberton, with Vivienne Caldwell named as the trust's primary beneficiary and sole directing authority. I had not known about the contingency clause until Walter had shown it to me 2 years ago. Edmund had put it there without telling me in March of 2019, at a moment when I could not have anticipated he would. He had trusted Walter to hold it and to wait for the right moment to apply it. Everett looked up from the table. He looked at me, and this time the expression on his face was not complicated. It was the face of a man who has just understood completely and without remainder that the ground he has been standing on was never what he thought it was. I held his gaze. Then Judge Whitfield adjourned the session, and we gathered our papers, and I walked out of the Superior Court of Connecticut into the October sunlight on Washington Boulevard. My phone showed 2 missed calls, both from Declan. I called him back as I reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. "Turn on the news," he said. "Any channel." His voice had the particular quality it took on when something had happened that was larger than what he had anticipated. I looked at Walter, who had come to stand beside me on the steps with his briefcase and his careful face. "What channel?" I said into the phone. "It doesn't matter," Declan said. "They're all running it. Before everything collapses in the next few minutes, drop the number 10 in the comments so I know you're still here. Because what's about to happen to Caldwell Industries will hit harder than anything that came before it. Note this story contains fictional elements crafted for educational purposes. Not every detail is drawn from documented fact. If you'd prefer a different kind of content, now is a good moment to choose." The collapse. Walter had a small television in his car, one of those fold-down screens built into the back of the headrest, a relic of a period when that feature represented luxury rather than obsolescence. He had never in the 22 years I had known him used it for anything other than reviewing depositions on long drives. He used it now. We sat in the parking structure adjacent to the courthouse, Walter in the driver's seat, me in the passenger seat, both of us watching a screen the size of a hardcover book display something that neither of us had anticipated happening on this particular Thursday in October. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking FBI and SEC execute simultaneous search warrants at Caldwell Industries Manhattan headquarters." The footage was aerial shot from a news helicopter showing the building at 1221 Avenue of the Americas from above. There were marked federal vehicles on the street, 4 of them black SUVs parked in a configuration that blocked the building's main entrance. Uniformed agents were visible at the doors. A small crowd had formed on the sidewalk, the kind of crowd that assembles around disruption. The way certain birds assemble around disturbance in the water, not because they know what is happening, but because something clearly is. The anchor's voice was composed in the way that television anchors are composed when they are reading information that arrived 12 minutes ago, and they are still working out what it means. Federal authorities confirmed this morning that agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission executed coordinated search warrants at the New York offices of Caldwell Industries, a privately held manufacturing and technology firm based in Greenwich, Connecticut. The warrants are understood to relate to an ongoing investigation into allegations of securities, fraud, wire fraud, and financial misappropriation. The company has not yet issued a public statement. Sources familiar with the investigation tell our correspondent that the inquiry has been active for approximately 8 months. 8 months. The investigation had been running since February of this year, which meant it had begun before Dennis Pryor sent his report to Walter, which meant Dennis had not been the only person inside Caldwell Industries who had noticed something wrong. Someone else had noticed first, or someone outside the company had been watching from a different angle entirely. I thought about Marshall Keene at the back of the courtroom this morning with his legal pad. The Wall Street Journal does not assign a senior financial correspondent to a private company's autumn gala without a reason. "Walter," I said. "I see it," he said. "This is not connected to our proceedings." "No," he said. "This is separate. This has been building independently." Which meant that whatever Portia and Morris Holt had been doing inside Caldwell Industries, the 17 wire transfers, the Delaware shell entities, the DPV Family Trust, had attracted attention from somewhere other than Dennis Pryor's careful eyes and Declan's database searches. Federal attention. The kind that takes 8 months to develop and arrives on a Thursday morning with search warrants and aerial footage. My phone rang. "Declan." "Are you watching?" he said. "Yes. What do you know beyond what's on screen?" The warrants cover financial records, electronic communications, and physical documents from January 2022 to present. The SEC component is civil. They're looking at whether Caldwell Industries misrepresented its operational costs and proprietary technology status in communications with prospective investors. A pause. The patent licensing issue is going to be relevant to the SEC case. If the company represented those processes as proprietary when they were actually infringing on your patents, that's a material misrepresentation. I had not considered that angle. I absorbed it. The FBI component I asked. Criminal. Wire fraud primarily. The transfers to the Delaware entities. They've had a cooperating witness for at least 4 months, according to a source Walter contacted this morning. A cooperating witness for 4 months. I looked at the screen. The aerial footage had shifted to a ground-level shot, a reporter standing on the sidewalk across from the building, microphone in hand, speaking into the camera with the practiced urgency of someone narrating history in the moment before they fully understand what kind of history it is. "Declan," I said. "Who is the cooperating witness?" A brief pause. "Dennis Pryor," he said. I closed my eyes for a moment. Dennis Pryor had been sitting on his information for 6 weeks before he sent it to Walter, but he had been sitting on a different version of it, a more complete version, for considerably longer. He had gone to the FBI before he came to us. He had done the harder thing first, the thing that required him to walk into a federal building and say under potential legal exposure that he had observed things inside a company he had worked for 19 years that he could not reconcile with his conscience. I owed Dennis Pryor a debt that had nothing to do with money. "Where is Portia?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "That's the other thing," Declan said. "I drove past the estate 40 minutes ago. There was a car in the drive, a town car, not the household vehicle. Agnes called me at 11 this morning. She said she saw Portia leave the house at 10:30 with 2 pieces of luggage bags that Agnes told me had been packed and sitting near the bedroom door since the evening before. The news anchor on the screen was now reading a statement from the SEC. The agency had obtained a temporary asset freeze order against Caldwell Industries and its principal officers, prohibiting the transfer or disposal of company assets pending the investigation. Under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, specifically Title 15 of the United States Code Section 78, the SEC, has authority to seek such orders in federal district court on an ex parte basis, meaning without prior notice to the target when there is reasonable cause to believe that assets may be dissipated or transferred to avoid liability. Portia Davenport was a principal officer of Caldwell Industries. An asset freeze order applied to her, and she had left the house at 10:30 in the morning with 2 pieces of luggage. Which airport? I said. I don't know yet, Declan said, but she was heading south on I-95. South on Interstate 95 from Greenwich, Connecticut, leads to one of 3 things: Westchester County, the Bronx, or if you stay on long enough, the terminals of John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens, New York. JFK is approximately 45 miles from Greenwich. In Thursday midday traffic with someone who is not stopping for anything approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes. I looked at the clock on Walter's dashboard. It was 11:52 in the morning. Harold, I said. Walter looked at me. My driver, I said. Call him. Tell him to meet us at the parking structure exit in 4 minutes. Vivienne. The asset freeze order applies to her. If she boards an international flight, she is in violation of a federal court order. I was already gathering my folder from the seat, and there are things in her possession that do not belong to her. Walter started the car. On the small screen in the headrest, the aerial footage showed the building at 1221 Avenue of the Americas, still surrounded by federal vehicles, still watched by the sidewalk crowd, still in the process of becoming the kind of story that gets referenced in financial journalism for years afterward. Everett was somewhere in that building or near it. I thought about his face in the courtroom this morning, the expression of a man understanding too late, and all at once the nature of the ground he had been standing on. He would have to wait. There was somewhere I needed to be first. Terminal 4, John F. Kennedy. International Airport's Terminal 7 handles international departures with the particular organized chaos of a place that processes 50,000 people a day and has no interest in the individual stories of any of them. Harold pulled to the departures curb at 12:47 in the afternoon. I was out of the car before he had fully stopped, which was something I had never done in 30 years of being driven anywhere, and which told me something about my own state of mind that I noted and set aside. Declan was already inside. He had taken a car service from Greenwich directly after our phone call arriving, 11 minutes ahead of me, and he had used those 11 minutes to do what Declan did when time was limited and information was necessary. He had walked the terminal, identified the check-in counters for international carriers, and located Portia Davenport standing in the priority line for a British Airways flight to London Heathrow departure at 2:15 in the afternoon. He texted me her location as I came through the sliding doors. Counter 17, priority lane. 2 bags checked carry-on in hand. I walked through Terminal 4 the way I had walked through the Greenwich Country Club ballroom 3 weeks earlier, without announcing myself, without altering my pace, without giving any indication to the people around me that I was moving towards something specific rather than simply moving. I saw her before she saw me. Portia Davenport was 42 years old and possessed of the particular self-possession of a woman who has spent years constructing a version of herself that the world would accept without examination. She was dressed for travel in a way that communicated deliberate normalcy. Dark trousers, a camel coat, hair pulled back. The 2 pieces of luggage she had checked were gone. The carry-on at her feet was a structured leather bag, the kind that fits precisely in an overhead bin and contains everything a person needs if they do not intend to return. Standing beside her, one hand resting on the handle of his own bag, was a man I recognized from the photograph Declan had pulled 3 days earlier. Shane Rourke, 29 years old, who had appeared in Portia's personal calendar, obtained through the discovery process associated with the corporate fraud investigation approximately 40 times in the preceding 18 months. He was lean younger than I had expected in person and wore the expression of a man who understood something was happening but had not fully assessed what. I stopped 4 feet from Portia. She turned before I said anything, some peripheral awareness, or simply the recognition that a certain quality of attention had entered her vicinity. When she saw me, something moved across her face very quickly. Not surprise, exactly. More like the expression of a person who has been waiting for a particular thing to happen and is now recalibrating the fact that it has arrived sooner than anticipated. "Vivienne," she said. Her voice was even. "Portia," I said. And then, after a moment, "Or would you prefer Patricia?" The evenness held for 2 more seconds. Then it shifted, not dramatically, not into anything that the people around us would have noticed, but I noticed it the way I had been noticing the small adjustments people make when the thing they have been avoiding catches up with them. Shane Rourke looked between us. "We should talk," I said to Portia, "before you get to the gate." "I don't think we have anything to discuss," she said. Her hand tightened slightly on the carry-on strap. "There is an SEC asset freeze order with your name on it filed this morning in the Southern District of New York. It prohibits the transfer or disposal of assets, and by extension, the departure from U.S. jurisdiction of persons named as principal officers in the associated investigation." I kept my voice at the level of ordinary conversation. The people in line around us were not listening. Boarding that flight would constitute contempt of a federal court order. I imagine the FBI field office at this airport is already aware of the order Walter made that call 40 minutes ago. They generally move quickly on international departures when a federal freeze order is active. I had in fact asked Walter to contact the FBI's JFK field office from the car on the drive down. Walter had made that call at 12:15. Whether the field office had acted on it in the intervening 30 minutes, I did not know. But Portia did not know that I did not know. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached into the carry-on bag and removed a manila envelope letter-sized, sealed with nothing written on the exterior. She held it for a moment with both hands, and I had the sense of watching a person make a calculation that they had perhaps been making for longer than this moment, a calculation about what they were willing to carry and what they were willing to put down. She held the envelope out to me. "Edmund sent this to George Merritt in February of 2019, she said. "Merritt gave it to me in 2022 after Edmund died. I've been holding it because I thought it might be useful." A pause. "It's more useful to you than it is to me now." 2 men in dark jackets had appeared at the far end of the check-in hall in the preceding 3 minutes. They had not approached. They did not need to. I took the envelope. I did not open it. "The bags you checked," I said. "Do they contain assets subject to the freeze order?" A silence. "Some of them," she said. "Then I would suggest you speak to an attorney before you attempt to retrieve them." I held the envelope. "And I would suggest you do not attempt to board that flight." Shane Rourke put his bag down. He had the look of a man who had agreed to accompany someone on a trip and was only now understanding what kind of trip it actually was. Portia looked at me one more time. The constructed self-possession had not collapsed. She was too practiced for that, but it had thinned the way expensive fabric thins when it has been pulled in too many directions for too long. "You could have done this differently," she said. "Years ago, you could have—" "No," I said. "I couldn't." I left her at the counter and walked back through Terminal 4, the envelope in my hand, Declan falling into step beside me as I passed the point where he had been waiting near the departure board. Outside, Harold was at the curb exactly where I had left him. I got into the car. Declan got in on the other side. Harold pulled away from the terminal without being asked. For 3 blocks, I held the envelope without opening it. Then I broke the seal. The first page was a printed email. The header showed a send date of February 14, 2019, 2 weeks before Edmund had visited Walter's office to update his will. The sender was Edmund Reginald Caldwell. The recipient was George Merritt, listed with a company domain I did not recognize. I read the first paragraph. Then I read it again. I looked out the window at the expressway at the flat, gray landscape of Queens moving past at highway speed at the ordinary Thursday afternoon, continuing entirely indifferently around a car containing a woman who had just read the first paragraph of something that changed in a significant and irreversible way what she understood about her son. "Declan," I said. "Yes." Everett didn't know. Declan was quiet for a moment. "Know what specifically?" he said carefully. I looked at the page in my hand. "Any of it," I said. The long road to Litchfield Interstate 95 northbound on a Thursday afternoon moves the way it always moves in the particular rhythm of a road that connects too many places to ever be fully clear, where the traffic compresses and releases like breathing, and the landscape shifts from the industrial flatness of Queens through the suburbs of Westchester and into the first suggestion of New England somewhere around Greenwich. I read the envelope's contents in the back seat while Harold drove, and Declan sat beside me without speaking, which was one of the things I valued most about him, his understanding that silence is not emptiness, but a form of respect for thinking. The envelope contained 6 pages. The first was the email I had already partially read, Edmund's message to George Merritt, dated February 14th, 2019. The remaining 5 pages were attachments, a series of internal memoranda, a partnership agreement addendum, and a single handwritten note on Caldwell Industries letterhead that Edmund had apparently included as a scanned attachment. I read them in order. George Merritt was 61 years old and had been Edmund's original business partner, one of 2 men who had helped Edmund capitalize Caldwell Industries in 1994, when the company was still a manufacturing operation running out of a leased warehouse in Stamford. Merritt had exited the partnership in 2001, selling his stake back to Edmund in a transaction that had on paper been entirely clean. I had reviewed those documents years ago in the early stages of my own legal preparation and found nothing irregular. What Edmund's February 2019 email revealed was that the 2001 exit had not been as clean as the paperwork suggested. Merritt had retained through a series of side agreements that Edmund described in the email as things he had signed without fully reading a phrase that appeared in Edmund's message with the particular weight of a man recognizing a pattern he had witnessed before a residual interest in Caldwell Industries' future earnings tied to specific operational benchmarks. The agreements were not recorded in the company's official partnership documents. They existed in a separate set of instruments that Merritt held and that Edmund, writing in February 2019, said he had only recently discovered in full when he undertook a comprehensive review of the company's historical legal files in preparation for updating his estate documents. Edmund's email to Merritt was not a threat. It was a question. He asked Merritt in the careful language of a man who wants to resolve something without destroying it, whether they could meet to discuss the side agreements and reach a mutual understanding about their current status. Merritt had apparently responded the handwritten note on Caldwell Industries' letterhead was Edmund's record of a phone conversation that followed the email by suggesting that the agreements were still valid, that the benchmarks had been met, and that he expected the residual interest to be honored in Edmund's estate planning. The final 3 pages were the partnership agreement addendum and its 2 annexes. Reading them, I understood what Merritt had done. The addendum created a structure under which if certain operational milestones were reached after 2015, Merritt would be entitled to a percentage of Caldwell Industries' profits routed through a designated intermediary entity. The intermediary entity, designated in the addendum, was a company called Sterling Bridge Consulting, LLC, registered in Delaware. Sterling Bridge Consulting, LLC, had been incorporated in 2016. Its registered agent was a firm in Wilmington, the same firm that had registered the 2 shell entities in the DPV family trust structure. And its listed manager, as of the 2018 annual report filed with the Delaware Division of Corporations, was Everett Caldwell. Everett had been listed as manager of a shell company, one that formed part of George Merritt's hidden financial infrastructure, without, based on everything Edmund's email described, any awareness of what the company actually was or what it was being used for. Merritt had used Edmund's own son as a named officer in a structure designed to route money outside of Caldwell Industries' visible accounts. Everett's name on the filing gave the entity apparent legitimacy. His signature on the annual report, which a 28-year-old who had recently joined his father's company might reasonably sign if asked by someone he trusted, gave Merritt legal cover. Portia had found this. She had held it since 2022. She had used the knowledge of Everett's unwitting involvement not as protection for Everett, but as leverage, something she could deploy if she needed to keep Everett compliant, or if she needed to deflect federal attention onto a more visible name. I set the pages down on my knee and looked out the window at the highway. "Declan," I said. "Yes." "How long have you known about Merritt?" A pause. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to answer, but the pause of someone deciding how much of the answer to give. 8 months, he said. "Since February. I found the Sterling Bridge filing when I was cross-referencing the Delaware entities. I didn't tell you immediately because I wanted to understand the full structure before I presented it. I didn't want to give you a piece of something and have you act on an incomplete picture. 8 months. The same window as the federal investigation. Did you share it with Walter?" "Yes. In March. Walter and I agreed to hold it until the other pieces were in place." He paused again. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." I looked at him. Declan Frost at 31 had the face of a person who had learned early that the world did not owe him clarity, and had developed in response to that understanding the particular self-sufficiency of someone who finds his own way through things. I had recognized that quality in him when he was 22 years old and working as Edmund's part-time caretaker, and I had recognized it because it was something I understood from the inside. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course." "The orphanage in Bridgeport, St. Agatha's. You were there from age 4 to age 11. "Yes." "I found your records in 2017 when I was reviewing charitable placement files connected to Meridian IP Associates." I kept my voice even. "I spent 2 years locating you before I arranged for you to come and assist Edmund in 2019. The introduction was made through intermediaries. Edmund believed the recommendation came through a professional network. It did not." Declan was quiet. "The trust was Meridian IP Associates," I said. "My trust." Outside the highway passed through a cut in the rock where the geology of Connecticut pushed up through the surface, gray stone streaked with rust, and white, indifferent and permanent. "I found you first," I said. "I had been looking for you for 2 years before Edmund hired you. I arranged the placement through channels that kept my name off the direct paperwork, because I didn't know yet what our relationship should look like, and I didn't want to make a decision I couldn't take back." I paused. "I should have told you years ago. I am telling you now." Declan looked at the back of Harold's seat for a long moment. "I knew," he said finally. "Not the details, but I knew it wasn't coincidence." He turned to look at me. "I've known since I was about 35. "And you stayed." "And I stayed," he said. The car turned off the highway onto the county road, and the trees closed in on both sides, and the late afternoon light came through the canopy in the long, slanted way that October light falls when the leaves have thinned enough to let it through. Harold turned onto my road and slowed at the top of the drive. There was a car in front of the house, a dark sedan, not a town car parked to the side of the gravel turnaround with the careful positioning of someone who had not wanted to block the way. Connecticut plates. I did not recognize the vehicle, but I recognized the figure sitting on the stone steps of the front porch with his jacket across his knees and his hands loose between them, looking at the ground. Everett. He had found my address not difficult if you know where to look, and Everett was his father's son in at least the one respect of being thorough when something mattered enough. He had driven to Litchfield Hills and parked and waited the way a person waits when they have run out of other options and have nothing left to do but sit with the weight of what they now understand. I looked at him through the car window for a moment before Harold stopped. He had not yet seen us pull in. I thought about the 6 pages in my lap, about Edmund's voice in the courtroom, about a 28-year-old signing an annual report for a company whose purpose he did not understand, because someone who should have protected him had used his name instead. "Harold," I said, "take the long way around to the garage." I needed 2 more minutes before I walked up those steps. The blue folder. The copper light of late October was doing what copper light does, showing everything without softening anything, when I came around the corner of the house, and Everett looked up from the front steps. He stood slowly. No jacket tie loosened the look of a man who had passed through several institutions in a single day and come out the other side of all of them without the armor those places require you to wear inside them. He did not speak first, neither did I. "Come inside," I said. I made coffee because it gave my hands something to do, and because the kitchen is the room in this house where I think most clearly. Everett sat at the long oak table and wrapped both hands around the cup I set in front of him. "The FBI came to my office this morning," he said. "They showed me a Delaware filing with my name on it, Sterling Bridge Consulting LLC. They asked when I had incorporated it." "What did you tell them?" "That I had never heard that name in my life." He looked at his cup. "They showed me my signature on the 2018 annual report." I sat down across from him and placed the manila envelope, Portia's envelope, obtained 2 hours earlier at Terminal 4, on the table between us. "George Merritt incorporated Sterling Bridge in 2016, I said. "He used it to route money outside Caldwell Industries' visible accounts. In the spring of 2018, he brought you a stack of annual reports and told you they were routine administrative filings related to the original 1994 partnership structure. You signed them." Everett was very still. "You were 28 years old and 8 months into the company," I said. "You trusted your father's original partner. Your name on that filing gave the entity apparent legitimacy. That was the only reason Merritt needed it there." "My father knew," Everett said. "It was not quite a question. He discovered the side agreements in early 2019. This envelope contains the email he sent Merritt about them and the documents he attached." I set my hand on the envelope briefly, then withdrew it. Edmund could not confront Merritt directly without alerting him, so he built the protection into the 2019 will, the audit requirement, the charitable commitments, the meeting with Walter. Those conditions were designed to force a financial review that would have surfaced Merritt's scheme before it could do further damage. Everett looked at the envelope for a long moment. "He was protecting me," he said. "Yes, and I didn't meet a single condition." I did not answer that. The answer was already in the room with us and did not need my voice to occupy more space than it already did. Under federal criminal law, I said, liability for financial fraud requires knowledge and intent. A named officer who signs documents based on misrepresentation by a trusted party without knowledge of their fraudulent purpose does not meet that standard. Walter communicated this to the FBI's lead agent this morning before the court session. "You are a witness in the federal case Everett, not a target." He looked up. "You did that," he said. "Walter did that," I said. "I asked him to." The railway clock above the stove marked the seconds. Outside, the hills had gone from copper to gray at their edges, the short October afternoon already folding into evening. Everett sat with everything I had told him, the scheme, the signature, his father's quiet protection. The way a person sits with something that is too large to absorb quickly and too important to rush. "There is something else," I said finally. "Something in my study that you need to see. It will take several hours." I stood and carried my cup to the sink. "It has been waiting for you for a long time." He looked at me. "How long?" he said. 30 years, I said, give or take. 30 years in a box. The archive lived in 4 banker's boxes, stacked in the lower cabinet of the built-in shelving along the study's north wall, the cabinet with the brass lock that I had never found it necessary to explain to anyone who visited, because no one who visited had ever asked about it. I unlocked it in front of Everett, which was the first time I had done that in 20 years. Declan had set a fresh legal pad and 2 pens on the table before quietly leaving the room, which was the kind of anticipatory consideration that I had come to rely on without ever needing to request it. The desk lamp was on. The overhead light was off. The room had the quality of a space prepared for something that required attention rather than performance. I placed the first box on the table. "These are organized chronologically," I said. "The first box covers 1990 through 2000, the second 2001 through 2010, the third 2011 through 2020, the fourth covers 2021 to the present." I paused. "There is a manila folder on top of the first box. I would suggest you begin there." Everett looked at the boxes. Then he looked at me. "How long will this take?" he said. "As long as it takes," I said. "I will be in the kitchen if you need anything." I left him there and closed the study door behind me. I did not go to the kitchen. I sat in the chair in the hallway outside the study door, an old wingback that had been there since I moved into the house, positioned originally to catch the morning light from the east window at the end of the hall, and repurposed tonight into something else entirely. I sat there and listened. Not to anything specific, to the quality of sound that comes from a room where a person is reading something that matters, the occasional turn of a page, a long silence, the small sounds of a person who is very still because the thing in their hands requires complete stillness. The manila folder on top of the first box contained the document I had placed there 12 years ago when I had first organized the archive with a half-formed understanding that someday someone would need to read it in sequence. It was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, dated March 1994. It was the original business plan sketch for what would become Caldwell Industries, Edmund's handwriting on one side, mine on the other. Edmund's side listed the operational structure, the initial capital requirements, the manufacturing capacity projections. My side listed the intellectual property framework, the patent strategy, the licensing model, the long-term revenue structure that would keep the company viable through the inevitable downturns of a manufacturing business, operating in a changing economic environment. Edmund's name was on the company. My strategy was in its foundation. At the bottom of my side of the page in Edmund's handwriting was a single line he had added without telling me. I had discovered it when I retrieved the document from a shared file in 2004 after the divorce, and had read it standing in Walter's office with my coat still on. It said the inscription at the bottom of a page, written 30 years before this autumn patient, certain and entirely right. Edmund had written that in 1994, 5 years before Everett was born, as though he had already known at the moment of founding that the company's real purpose was not the company itself, but the legacy it would leave to a child who did not yet exist. I had held that page for 20 years and had not been able to decide for most of those years whether Edmund's inscription was a gift or a responsibility. Tonight, I had placed it on top of the archive and let Everett make that determination for himself. The first box took him approximately 2 hours. I knew this because I tracked the quality of the silence from the hallway, and at roughly the 2-hour mark just past 10 o'clock in the evening, there was a longer silence than the ones preceding it, followed by the sound of a box being set aside and another being lifted onto the table. The second box was the decade of the divorce and its aftermath, 2001 through 2010. It contained the patent filings, the Meridian IP Associates formation, documents, the Litchfield Capital, LLC instruments, the property purchase records. It also contained, in a green folder near the bottom, the complete correspondence between Walter and myself from 2004 through 2008, the years when I had been building most actively and most quietly, when Everett had been between 5 and 9 years old and had spent alternate weeks in 2 different houses without understanding why the houses felt so different from each other. I had included that correspondence deliberately. I wanted Everett to read in the actual language of the time, what I had been doing while he was learning to read and ride a bicycle, and navigate the specific confusion of a child whose parents no longer lived together. I wanted him to understand that the building and the loving had been simultaneous, that one had not displaced the other, that the strategy had never been a substitute for the presence. Whether the documents conveyed that I could not know. Documents convey facts. The thing behind the facts is harder to transmit. The second box took him 90 minutes. The third 2011 through 2020 took nearly 3 hours. It was the densest box the years of Everett's adolescence and early adulthood, the years when the patent licensing revenue had begun to compound into something substantial, the years when Vivienne had begun quietly and without announcement to build the structure that would eventually become the Caldwell Foundation. There were projections in that box, financial models Walter and I had developed together showing what the combined assets of Meridian IP Associates and Litchfield Capital LLC could sustain in terms of charitable programming over a 20-year horizon. The projections had a name at the top of the cover page: The Caldwell Foundation Proposed Structure and Mission 2017, 7 years ago, 3 years before any of the events of this autumn. Vivienne had been planning the foundation not as a response to Everett's failures, but as a destination, a place toward which everything she had built was always intended to travel. The study door opened at 2:14 in the morning. I was still in the wingback chair in the hallway. I had not slept. I had not intended to sleep. Everett stood in the doorway with the 1994 sketch in his hand, the single-page Edmund's handwriting on one side, mine on the other, the inscription at the bottom. He had been crying. He was not crying now, but the evidence of it was in his face, in the unambiguous way that evidence presents itself when a person has stopped trying to manage their appearance, because there is no longer any appearance worth managing. He looked at me in the wingback chair. "You've been sitting there," he said. "Yes." "The whole time?" "Yes." He looked down at the page in his hand. Then he looked back at me. "He wrote this before I was born," he said. 5 years before it, I said. He leaned against the door frame, not from weakness, from the particular need of a person who requires something solid behind them while they process something that has no solid edges. "I didn't know," he said, "about any of it. Not merit, not the patents, not—" He stopped, started again. "Not what you were doing. All of it. I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was the question I had been waiting for, and I had prepared no answer because the honest answer is not a preparation, it is simply the truth which does not require rehearsal. "Because some things have to be earned before they can be understood," I said. "And I was waiting to see what kind of man you would become." The hallway was very quiet. The old house settled around us the way old houses do in the cold hours of early morning, small sounds familiar and unalarming, the sounds of a structure that has been standing long enough to know its own weight. Everett looked at the page in his hand one more time. Then he set it carefully on the hallway table beside the wing-back chair, not handing it to me, but placing it between us, which was something different, and walked back into the study to continue reading. I sat in the chair and listened to him turn to the fourth box. Dissolution. 10 days passed between the night Everett read the archive and the morning we sat in Walter's office to sign the dissolution documents. I will not account for every hour of those 10 days in detail, because some of what happened in them belongs to Everett alone. The conversations he had with attorneys, with federal investigators, with the board members of a company that was no longer operationally viable, and that every person in the relevant rooms understood was not going to survive what had been done to it. Frank Delano called me on October 28th, 3 days after the FBI raid, and said in the careful way of a man choosing his words with precision, "Whatever you need from me, Vivienne, I am available." I thanked him and told him Walter would be in touch. Dennis Pryor submitted his formal resignation from Caldwell Industries on October 30th. I called him that afternoon. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been expecting the call. "You did the right thing," I said. "I did the legal thing," he said. "The right thing would have been earlier." I understood what he meant. I did not argue with it. Walter's office on the morning of November 4th had a quality of deliberate quiet. The quiet of a room where something is being concluded rather than begun, where the documents on the table represent not a plan, but a resolution. Declan was there. Everett was there, sitting to my left in the chair that Gerald Stanton had occupied 11 days earlier, which I noticed and did not remark upon. The dissolution of Caldwell Industries, Incorporated, a Connecticut corporation required under Connecticut General Statutes, Section 33, Chapter 884. Either a vote of the Board of Directors followed by shareholder approval or a written consent signed by shareholders holding sufficient voting power to authorize the action. The court's reinstatement of the 2019 will, combined with the trust structure Edmund had embedded in its contingency clause, had placed effective controlling authority over the company's shares in the trust administered by Walter, with Vivienne as directing beneficiary. In practical terms, this meant I held the authority to authorize the dissolution. Walter had prepared the written consent. It was 4 pages, precise and unambiguous, accompanied by a board resolution signed by the 2 remaining board members, Frank Delano and Stuart Gibbs, who had each reviewed the situation independently and reached the same conclusion that the company in its current form could not continue. The federal investigation had frozen its operating accounts. The patent infringement liability remained unresolved. The reputational damage from the public reporting Marshall Keene's piece in the Wall Street Journal had run on October 28th under a headline that I will not repeat here because it was accurate and therefore painful, had closed the remaining doors that the legal proceedings had left open. I signed the written consent. Walter notarized it. Everett watched. I had asked him the previous week whether he wanted to be present for the signing. He had said yes without hesitation, which I took to mean that he understood the value of witnessing the end of something clearly, without looking away. "Is there anything you want to say before this is finalized?" Walter asked him. It was a courtesy question. The documents were already prepared. The legal effect was already determined, but Walter extended it with the particular grace of a man who understands that legal processes move through human moments, not around them. Everett looked at the dissolution consent on the table. He was quiet for a moment. "My father built that company from a warehouse in Stamford," he said. "I spent 6 years trying to be the right person to carry it forward, and I was not paying enough attention to know that I wasn't." He paused. "I think ending it formally is the honest thing to do." I think he would have agreed. Walter nodded and added the board resolution to the file. The Caldwell Foundation had been incorporated as a Connecticut nonprofit corporation 4 days earlier, on October 31st, using the structural framework from the 2017 projections. In the archive, the document Everett had read in the study at approximately 3 a.m. on October 26th, approximately 45 minutes before he finished the 4th box, and came back into the hallway and sat down on the floor against the wall, and did not say anything for a long time. I had sat in the wingback chair and not said anything either. Sometimes the correct response to a person processing something enormous is simply to remain present without filling the space. The Foundation's stated mission, as filed with the Connecticut Secretary of State and submitted to the Internal Revenue Service as part of the Form 1023 application for recognition as a tax-exempt organization under Section 501(c)(3) of the Internal Revenue Code, was to provide financial assistance, educational support, and professional development resources to individuals entering or advancing within skilled trades and technical fields, with priority given to applicants demonstrating financial need and community commitment. It was in its essential purpose the thing I had been building toward for 7 years. Not a response to Everett's failures, a destination. Patricia Slade, 58 years old, had spent 31 years in nonprofit administration, most recently as executive director of a workforce development organization in Bridgeport that had placed over 4,000 people in skilled employment since its founding. Walter had identified her in 2022 as the right person to run the operational side of the foundation, and she had spent the intervening 2 years in quiet preparation, reviewing the projected financials, developing program structures, building the relationships with community colleges and trade organizations that would make the work real rather than merely institutional. She met us at the Superior Court in Stamford at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where the final court filings related to the dissolution and trust transfer were submitted. She was precise, warm, without being performative about it, and possessed of the particular energy of someone who has been waiting a long time to begin work they believe in. Everett shook her hand and said, I've read the program projections. The apprenticeship component is the strongest part. Patricia Slade looked at him with the careful appraisal of a person assessing whether someone means what they say. It is, she said. We'll need people who understand that from the inside. He did not respond immediately. He looked at me. I kept my face neutral because this was his moment to navigate, not mine. I'm available, he said to Patricia Slade, if the foundation has use for someone starting at the beginning. She said she would be in touch. On the drive back to Litchfield Hills that evening, Declan was quiet for the first part of the journey, then said, without particular preamble, "The foundation's first grant cycle opens December 1st. Patricia has 23 applications already in review from the Bridgeport outreach." 23, I said. She said to expect 40 by the end of the month. I looked out the window at the Connecticut dusk, the particular deep blue of a November evening when the last light has gone from the sky. But the darkness has not yet fully committed a brief suspended state that lasts perhaps 7 minutes and that most people drive through without registering. I registered it. The company was gone. The structure Edmund and I had built in a Stamford warehouse in 1994, the company that had carried our name for 30 years, that had employed hundreds of people, that had been the vehicle for one man's vision and one woman's quiet foundation, was legally dissolved. Its assets transferred, its accounts frozen, its future appropriated by people who had understood its value without understanding its purpose. What remained was the purpose. And the purpose, as of October 31st, had a name and an address and 23 applications from people in Bridgeport who needed something real. I thought about the 1994 sketch, Edmund's handwriting on one side, mine on the other. The inscription at the bottom that he had written before Everett existed. The inscription at the bottom of a page written 30 years before this autumn patient, certain and entirely right. I thought Everett might be getting close. The first day, the Caldwell Foundation's offices occupied the second floor of a converted brick building on Mason Street in Greenwich, a building that had been in sequence a textile warehouse, a printing facility, and a small manufacturing operation before the last tenant moved out in 2019, and the building sat empty for 3 years while its owner decided what it wanted to become. Patricia Slade had found it in August. She had walked through the empty space with a tape measure and a legal pad and had called Walter afterward to say that the bones were right, her exact words, which Walter had relayed to me with the faint amusement of a man who appreciates precision in metaphor. The renovation had taken 6 weeks. The offices were functional rather than decorative, exposed brick, good lighting, long work tables, filing systems that were already full. I drove past the building at 7:50 in the morning on December 2nd on my way to an appointment in Greenwich proper, and I saw Everett's car in the small lot behind the building. He had arrived before the office opened. I noted this and continued to my appointment. Declan called me at noon. "He's been here since 7:30, he said. Declan had been at the foundation since 8 o'clock, helping Patricia's team with the grant application database that was still being configured. Patricia put him on file review. 41 applications first grant cycle. He's been reading them since 8:15. Has he said anything? Not much. He asked Patricia 2 questions, one about the income verification process, one about the apprenticeship placement criteria. Both good questions. She answered them and went back to her own work. I thought about Everett at 34 sitting at a long work table in a converted warehouse, reading the financial disclosures and personal statements of 41 people who needed something he had never needed in his life, the specific assistance of an institution that existed to help people who did not have what he had always assumed was simply the natural condition of a life. The applications, I said, what are they like? Declan was quiet for a moment in the particular way that means he is choosing how to answer something that carries weight. There's one from a 22-year-old in Bridgeport, he said. Single mother, 2 children, currently working part-time at a hardware store, enrolled in an electrical apprenticeship program but unable to continue because the required tools and certification fees exceed her monthly budget by approximately $400. A pause. Everett read that one twice. I saw him set it aside separately from the others. I did not respond immediately. There's another from a 57-year-old in New Haven, Declan continued. Former factory worker plant closed in 2020, spent 3 years trying to retrain in HVAC installation. He's 20 credits from certification. He wrote in his personal statement that he has always worked with his hands and does not know how to stop. The foundation's first grant cycle had a total available funding pool of $800,000, drawn from the initial capitalization of the charitable trust. Patricia had designed the program to award grants averaging between $3,000 and $8,000 per recipient, which meant the first cycle would serve approximately 100 to 200 individuals, a number that Patricia had described when she presented the program design to Walter in September as a beginning. "Is Patricia satisfied with how he's working?" I asked. "She came to find me about an hour ago," Declan said. She said, and I'm quoting her directly, "He reads carefully and he doesn't pretend to understand things he doesn't understand. That's rarer than it should be." I went to the foundation at 3 o'clock in the afternoon under the pretext of dropping off a signed document for Walter that Patricia needed in the physical file. It was a pretext, and Patricia likely knew it was a pretext and said nothing, which was one of the reasons I had known she was the right person for this work. The office was quiet in the mid-afternoon. 2 staff members were at their stations. Patricia was in her glass-walled office on a call. Declan was at a workstation near the window. Everett was at the long center table still reading. He had removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. In front of him was a neat stack of reviewed applications on his left, a smaller stack on his right, and a legal pad covered in notes in his handwriting. He had been at that table for approximately 7 hours. He looked up when I came in. "The electrical apprentice from Bridgeport," he said, without preamble, as though we had been in the middle of a conversation. "Yes," I said. "Her certification fee is $420. The tool requirement list comes to another $310. $730 total is the difference between her completing the program and not completing it." He looked at the application in his hand. "She's been working at the hardware store for 2 years. She knows what the tools are for. She just can't buy them." I sat down across from him. "That is what the foundation is for," I said. He set the application down on the right-hand stack, the smaller one. "I put the ones I think should be prioritized on the right," he said. Patricia said to flag anything I felt strongly about. I flagged 19. Out of 41. "Yes," he looked at me. "Is that too many, That's Patricia's determination," I said. "Not mine." He nodded and picked up the next application. I delivered the document to Patricia's office and left. At 5:30, Dennis Pryor arrived. I did not know he was coming. Declan had not mentioned it. Patricia had apparently reached out to him independently in her capacity as foundation director, because Dennis Pryor had 19 years of experience managing skilled labor operations at a manufacturing facility, which meant he understood from the inside what the apprenticeship program's graduates would need to succeed in actual workplace environments. Patricia had asked him to consult on the apprenticeship placement criteria. Dennis and Everett had been in the same building, the Caldwell Industries Manhattan office, for 6 years. They had not, as far as I knew, spent significant time in direct conversation. Dennis had been operations. Everett had been executive. The floors between them had been considerable. Declan told me later that evening that Dennis had arrived, seen Everett at the table, stopped in the doorway for a moment, and then walked in and sat down across from him. They talked for 40 minutes. Declan did not tell me what they said because he had not been close enough to hear, and because some conversations are not meant to be reported. What he did tell me was that when Dennis left at 6:15, he stopped at the door and said to Everett, "Same time Thursday," and Everett had said yes. I drove home to Litchfield Hills in the early December dark, the hills invisible on either side of the county road, the headlights making a small moving world out of the immediate 20 feet of pavement ahead. I thought about Dennis Pryor walking into that office and sitting down. I thought about the 22-year-old in Bridgeport with the electrical apprenticeship and the $730 gap. I thought about the 57-year-old in New Haven who did not know how to stop working with his hands. I thought about Everett at the long table, sleeves rolled legal pad covered in notes, flagging 19 applications out of 41, because he felt strongly about them. The foundation had been open for one day. It already felt like something that had been waiting a long time to become itself. I thought about December 20th, the date I had chosen weeks ago for a conversation I had been preparing for longer than Everett knew. There was still one thing left to do. The kitchen Declan left at 6 o'clock. He had been at the house since 4, helping me with the Foundation's December grant correspondence, 43 award letters that needed to go out before the end of the week, each one reviewed individually because Patricia and I had agreed that a letter informing a person that their circumstances were about to change deserved to be read by a human being before it was sent, not generated and dispatched without consideration. He gathered his coat and his bag in the hallway and paused at the door. "He's coming at 7, he said. It was not a question. Yes. Declan looked at me for a moment with the particular expression he reserved for occasions when he wanted to say something and had decided that saying it was unnecessary because I already knew it. "Good luck," he said instead, which told me he had concluded that what I already knew was insufficient and that the sentiment was worth adding regardless. I thanked him and locked the door behind him and went to the kitchen. I had made dinner. This requires a brief explanation because cooking is not something I do frequently or with particular enthusiasm. My relationship with the kitchen is functional, rather than devotional, oriented toward adequacy rather than artistry. But there are occasions when the act of preparing food for another person is itself the communication, when the specific effort of it says something that words arrange themselves less efficiently around. I made Edmund's soup. Not because it was Edmund's recipe, it was mine developed over 30 years from a base Edmund had taught me in the first winter of our marriage when we had been living in a rented apartment in Stamford and the heating was unreliable, and soup was the most practical response to both the temperature and the budget. I had modified it considerably over the decades, but its origin was his, and its presence in the kitchen on this particular evening was a deliberate choice that I expected Everett would recognize. He arrived at 7 o'clock exactly, which was his father's habit, and one of the few things he had inherited from Edmund without apparent effort. He knocked, which he had not done as a child, and which told me something about how he understood his position in relation to this house, not as a place he had a right to enter, but as a place he was a guest in which was an accurate understanding and a new one. "It's open," I called from the kitchen. He came through the hallway and stood in the kitchen doorway in the way that people stand in doorways when they are not sure of the temperature of the room they are about to enter, not the literal temperature, but the other kind. He was wearing a jacket I had not seen before, not the expensive dark suit of the courtroom, something simpler, wool, dark green, the kind of jacket a person wears when they are not trying to communicate anything about themselves through their clothing. "Soup," he said. "Sit down," I said. He sat at the long oak table, and I brought 2 bowls and bread, and we ate for a while without speaking, which was something we had not done, eaten together in silence without the silence being hostile, in longer than I could accurately calculate. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the December night had brought the first real cold of the season, the kind that settles in before Christmas and stays through February, and the windows had fogged at the edges in the way that windows do in old houses, where the heat inside and the cold outside are in close enough proximity to negotiate with each other continuously. Everett ate the way a person eats when they are hungry, and also when they are using the act of eating to organize what they are about to say. He set his spoon down after the first bowl. "I owe you an apology," he said, "not the kind that covers specific events, the kind that covers a way of being." I waited. I spent a long time believing that what I had, the education, the position, the company, was something I had earned independently, that the people who contributed to it were contributors in a supporting role, not in a foundational one. He looked at the table. "I treated you as though you were peripheral. You were not peripheral. You were the foundation, and I didn't look at the foundation because I was too occupied with the structure above it." It was a good apology. It was precise, and it did not ask for anything in return, which is the quality that distinguishes an apology from a negotiation. "I know," I said. "And that's not—" He stopped. "You're not going to make this easier, are you?" "No," I said, "because you don't need it to be easier. You need it to be real." He looked at me. The red at the rims of his eyes that I had first seen in the hallway outside the study at 2:14 in the morning was not present tonight. What was present was something harder to describe, a quality of attention that I recognized distantly from the man his father had been at his best, completely present without the management layer that ambition and insecurity install between a person and the room they are actually in. "The woman in Bridgeport," he said, "with the electrical apprenticeship." "Patricia approved her application on Thursday," I said. Something moved across his face, not surprise, recognition. "There are going to be more of them," he said. "Many more," I said. "That is the point." I stood and carried the bowls to the sink. Then I went to the hallway, the coat closet, the second shelf where I had placed the package 3 days earlier when I had driven to the supply store in Waterbury and spent 40 minutes making a selection with the same care I had given to any significant decision in the preceding 30 years. I brought it back to the kitchen and set it on the table in front of him. It was not wrapped. It did not need to be wrapped. What it was communicated clearly enough without decoration. A set of high-visibility work gear, an orange and yellow safety vest, a pair of work gloves rated for electrical environments, and a hard hat in the Caldwell Foundation's colors, which Patricia had established as deep blue and white. On the inside of the hard hat, in the space provided for the wearer's name, I had written 2 words in permanent marker: Everett Caldwell. Not the CEO of Caldwell Industries, not the McGill graduate, not the board member, not the man who had raised a champagne glass in a ballroom and felt entirely secure. Everett Caldwell. A name. The name Edmund had written on the bottom of a sketch in 1994 before the person bearing it existed as a destination rather than a starting point. Everett looked at the gear on the table for a long moment. Then he picked up the hard hat and read the name inside it. He set it back down carefully, the way you set something down when you intend to pick it up again soon. "Patricia Slade said I start on the apprenticeship site visits in January," he said. "She told me," I said. "She also said I'll need steel-toed boots." "The list is on the Foundation's website," I said, "under Apprenticeship Program Resources." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile I had seen from him I did not calculate the interval, because some intervals are better left unmeasured. "Mom," he said. It was the first time in 4 years. I turned back to the sink and finished washing the bowls. "Eat the rest of your bread," I said. "It's cold outside and you have a long drive." I came downstairs at 5:20 and found that Everett had not left. His car sat in the dry frost on the roof, the particular stillness of a vehicle that has been parked in cold air for hours. His coat hung on the hook by the front door, placed there with the consideration of a guest in a house that is not his, which was an accurate understanding and a new one. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window while it ran. December 21st is the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the morning when darkness has reached its furthest extent and without ceremony begun to retreat. I have always found it more significant than the calendar New Year. The solstice is the real turn, the moment when the light decides quietly and without asking anyone's permission to begin coming back. Everett was asleep in the wingback chair in the hallway, not the study. The hallway, the same chair where I had sat all night on October 25th while he read the archive behind the closed door. He had found it and understood its purpose and chosen it. He was wearing the work vest, the high-visibility orange and yellow over his dark green jacket. The hard hat sat on the hallway table beside him, exactly where he had placed Edmund's 1994 sketch 57 days earlier. I looked at him for a moment. 33 years old, his father's jaw of fire burned down to coals, not gone, waiting. I went to the study without waking him. At 7:15, he appeared in the doorway. The early gray light came through the east window behind him. "Site visits start January 6th, he said. "Bridgeport first." "Bring the gear," I said. "Patricia already told me." A pause. The soup. It tastes the same as when I was a kid." "I changed it considerably over the years," I said. "It tastes the same," he said. He put on his coat over the work vest, picked up the hard hat, and held it at his side. He looked at the hallway one last time. The chair, the table, the light, the way a person memorizes a room they intend to return to. "Mom," he said. It was the first time in 4 years. I turned back to the window. "Drive carefully," I said. "It is cold, and the county road holds ice longer than it looks like it does." He walked to the front door and opened it. The cold came in clean and immediate. He stepped outside, scraped the windshield without ceremony, and pulled onto the county road. The hills were beginning to show their shape against the lightening sky, not fully visible, present. Declan arrived at 8, made coffee, and came to the study doorway. "How did last night go?" he said. I thought about the kitchen, the soup, the hard hat, the word that had cost 4 years of silence and 3 seconds to say. "Well," I said, "he went to his desk." Outside, the solstice light came in low and cold over the ridgeline, unhurried and entirely sufficient. People ask if I regret the 30 years of silence. I don't, but I won't tell you to do what I did. I waited too long. I built beneath my son instead of beside him. I also chose to let the conditions in Edmund's will expire without telling Everett they existed. And I have asked myself, in the years since, whether that was justice or severity. I do not have a clean answer. No legal victory returns the years that cost. My mother always said God doesn't waste pain. He shapes it into something the person you're becoming will need. Standing here at 60, I finally believe her. Don't wait for the people you love to earn the truth. Tell them sooner. Grandma revenge at its finest isn't about winning. It's about the quiet, dignified reclamation of what was always yours. Raw revenge built on anger alone leaves you emptier than where you started. I've seen both. One destroys, the other builds. Grandma revenge done with patience builds foundations that outlast everything they tried to take from you. Raw revenge burns the house. Raw revenge wastes the years. Grandma revenge done right changes lives. That is my opinion. I have earned it. If this story moves something in you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. The next story goes somewhere even deeper. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built for educational purposes. If that's not for you, no judgment. Choose what serves you best.